today I have the pleasure of speaking with Alec Torelli. Alec, I've come to learn, is what you call a professional risk taker. What do you think about that, Alec?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe overall a lot of what I do. So I'm a professional poker player, I guess, is the most specific risk that I've been taking the last 10 years. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in Orange County, California, raised with really good parents. I had a good background and good childhood. It was pretty picturesque growing up in Irvine, very safe place and a quaint little neighborhood, I guess. And then I started getting into poker, really fascinated with the game. I always grew up playing chess. I really liked geometry in high school. I was really fascinated with this sort of analytical, logical thinking. These sort of games always intrigued me. And so I started playing poker when I was around 16 and really took off in high school. I really, really loved it. And I went to college when I was 18 and SMU, and I decided shortly after there to start playing poker full time. And I was like 18 and a half, close to 19, 18 and a half, I started traveling the world for these tournaments, mostly outside the US, because of course in the US you can't, play poker or gamble legally until you're 21. And so I would travel internationally to compete in these tournaments, and I had a lot of success from a young age at that. And so I stuck with it, and almost 10 years later, I'm still competing.
Still at it.
Yeah.
You're certainly the first professional poker player I've had the pleasure of speaking to, so I'm very intrigued about some of your decisions that you've made. You said you were about 16. Was there any kind of cataclysmic event, special moment that said, you know what, this is going to be my career?
I could say that there was definitely a moment. I could say that the first time I really fell in love with the game was honestly the first time I started playing. I watched this is very common, I feel like I represent a lot of the poker community when I say that I started in a way that a lot of people did, in that I saw Chris Moneymaker win this major tournament on TV, the World Series of Poker 2003. It's known as the poker boom in our industry, and so I was very impressionable, very young at that time, and I sort of fell in love with this idea that anyone could win, and that was sort of the selling point that they made in the story. And it's like you could play this game, and so I played a game with friends right after one summer day, and I remember winning $12 the first time I played, and I was just completely hooked. I loved it, and I just loved like all the elements that go into playing poker, like the bluffing, the betting, and then I really stuck with it. I really applied myself, and I took the game very seriously, as I did with chess. I would read all these books. I would study, like in chess I studied opening moves and whatever. I was never very good at chess, but in poker I studied like opening hands and what hands you should play and how you should play them and the math and the odds, and I really took my game to a more serious level than all my friends. And when I was 18, I decided to, I really had a moment when I decided to play full time, and I really made that commitment.
Okay, so it sounds, from a motivational perspective, we would say that Chris Moneymaker was a performance model for you. You saw that he was doing successful, and were you having these thoughts like, well, if he can do that, I can do that too?
Yeah, in a way, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't connect it as much to him per se. I would connect it to the whole image of the TV perspective and like all these young people that are doing this and whatever. And then when I saw that and was inspired by that, I saw that I felt confident that I was better than the people that I was playing with, which was a very small circle of friends from high school. But I saw that I rose to the top of that small little player pool, and so I felt confident in my game. And then every time I would take that next step, maybe it was going to a local casino or playing my first time online or going to my first live tournament, and seeing that having that feeling inside that like I see the people around me and I don't see a big difference between where they are and where I am, and I feel like, wow, I could get there. I know that, and I outplayed them in one hand, and getting those little incremental boosts of confidence, I felt like really helped my game, and it it's just been progressing throughout my career, I feel like.
Okay, well, that leads me to an interesting thought. I'm wondering if the results you achieved were instrumental in your success, but you also mentioned that you're really a student of the game. So is there a knowledge component going on here that was developing along the way? Is that something that you think has influenced you?
Yeah, in other words, you're asking if your knowledge helps your expertise of the game, or
Well, we could generally assume that knowledge would help expertise in any field, but I'm just asking you as a player, you said you were developing confidence.
Right.
I'm wondering if that confidence is a result of winning, or if that confidence is a result of building your knowledge along the way. Or maybe they're the same.
No, that's a great question, because in poker there's so much what we call noise, in that you could be a bad player and win, and you could be a good player and lose,
Correct.
simply because there is luck. Whereas in chess, of course, the best player is going to win 99.9% of the time, or something like that. Poker's not like that. I think the best player, if you and I sit down and play, if not you and I, but if one person who's never played poker, not never played, but they are very rudimentary, and I'm very talented, I might win 65% of the time. It's not that high. But casinos win 51% of the time. It's enough in the long run. But I think, going back to your question, because there's that diversity between luck and skill, I think that your confidence comes initially from winning, because you don't have the skill and the expertise. You haven't done the homework, and so you think you're very results oriented. You're very you base your success on the results. So you think, oh my gosh, I won this tournament. I won this isolated scenario. I picked this winning stock, or something random happened. I bet on this winning football team. I must be good at betting football. I must be good at poker because I won this hand. So your confidence initially comes from winning. And in the beginning, I was winning in the games I was playing, and it was probably mostly because of luck, because I happened to be that guy that won. And so I thought I was very good. And looking back, I realized I wasn't talented at all. And now my confidence has changed completely, and it comes much more from the work I put in, much more from the homework I do. And now, even if I go to the poker table, sometimes I lose, I have terrible days, and I come home feeling very content and very satisfied, because I know I played my best, I outplayed my opponents, I did my best work, and the cards didn't go my way, but I can't control those things, and I did all I could. And other times it's the opposite. I go to the table, I win a good amount of money, and I'm very upset in a way, because I know that I didn't compete my best. And yes, I beat my opponent, but I'm competing against myself, and I didn't rise to my best level.
Well, competing against yourself is a really important point. Let's talk about that for a minute. Okay, Alec, you just said that when you are focusing on a poker hand or a poker game, however you want to describe it, that you have your own performance standards that may be different from the luck that the cards bring you. Am I interpreting you correctly?
Yeah, I would say that's very true, and I think that poker is very similar in this way. If you look at the people that are really competing at the top of the industry, it's very similar in this way to another sport. And I think that to really succeed at the high levels of our game, you really need to have that perspective, because there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of opportunity. And so whenever that happens, the competition level always raises. And so I think that really helps you always perform your best, and to stay humble and always try and really work harder to improve, because there's always something you could be doing better. There's always something to learn, and you're always sort of a student of the game. And having that attitude really helps you perform.
So what do you do to get ready to perform, and how are you increasing the knowledge? Since you're really operating at a very high level now, so it's not like you probably don't have more specific knowledge than the person sitting next to you, but do you have any strategies that you use to prepare yourself mentally?
Yeah, gosh, I feel like that's something I work
This is
on.
it, huh?
Yeah. So it could range from a lot of things. It depends on really being I guess the big picture is really being in touch with, because it's such a mental game, and you need to be so inspired to play and motivated to play, and really always mentally sharp. It really starts with being in touch with yourself and what you're feeling at that moment. Because if you're feeling any sort of negativity or any sort of emotions inside, that's all going to translate to the poker table. So if you're feeling frustrated, you might play a hand in a way that is a little more aggressive than you should, and that's really going to cost you money, And so being in touch with yourself first is really important to going into the table, and leaving whatever emotions you have behind in the real world and not taking that to the table.
Okay, so that's a preparatory step.
Yeah.
You're playing a hand. Are you really reflecting on your own thought during the process of a hand and saying to yourself, oh, should I go in? What factors should I consider here? Are you? We call it monitoring. Are you monitoring your thought during the actual game playing, or is it more spontaneous?
No, it's definitely monitoring, and I think the monitoring happens more, in between the hands, or when you're not actually physically playing the hand. Maybe you're being in touch with the fact that you just won a big hand, or maybe you just lost a big hand, and how does that affect your emotional state? And so, let's say you buy in for a certain amount of money, you lost that amount of money. Okay, then you buy in again, you lose that amount of money again. Now it's really being in touch with, okay, I don't need to recoup that money right away, and I'm just going to try and focus on making the next best decision and playing my best.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times if you're trying to force action or do something, ahead of time, you're going to really put yourself in a compromising spot. And so just being in touch with what you're feeling in that moment,
Right.
and just letting that go and kind of doing whatever that routine is to get that out of your system so that you can focus on making the best decisions possible is really important.
Well, you seem to make that sound like it's very easy to do, and I might debate that with you after the camera's off. But how do you possibly regulate your emotions considering the highs and the lows of the game? That must be very challenging. I know it would be for me.
Practice. I mean, that's it's really practice and working on it. It's like there's not really a secret to doing it easily, but I would say that something I like to do is developing like a routine every time I'm in a hand, and I really treat each hand of poker as maybe a tennis player would a point of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
It's an analogy I like to use because it's very clear to see, like when they walk up to the line and they dribble the ball,
Right.
and then they get ready for that point, they get the towel, they wipe the sweat off their face, and they're really, that time in between is time that they can, hit their racket and let off frustration and whatever. But when they walk up to that line and they dribble the tennis ball, they're focused on the next point.
Right.
And in a hand of poker, it happens that quickly. Hands are dealt very quickly. And so you don't really have that much time in between hands to sort of
Ruminate.
refocus.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of things that are quick. I have breathing exercises I do. I try and practice some yoga outside of my poker playing to stay focused mentally. And I really like to have little mental tricks like that I call triggers. So for example, if a certain action happens, every time that action happens, boom, I'm focused again and I restart my routine. So I'm always staying constantly present, always staying mentally sharp, and I'm sort of always letting go of recent negativity that happens. I'm not letting that build up inside me and just kind of letting it go. And I think that really helps you to stay focused at the table and also just always playing your best.
And I've watched poker tournaments on television, and there are hundreds or thousands of people around. There's a lot of people walking around, a lot of distractions. How do you focus and channel your cognitive approach to playing with everything else that's going on there? Does that even enter into your radar screen?
I think that you see that sometimes as well in what you might see in sports. I guess to always go back to sports, it's easier for people to kind of relate to this. Like a big game, and let's say it's an athlete's first time going to the Super Bowl or like a big tennis final or something, and they may feel that pressure, and they're the announcers talk about it. And are they going to play well? And they're playing against a big opponent. They're playing under pressure. Everybody's watching. How are they going to perform? And of course, the edge always goes to who? Person with more experience. And so it's a lot easier for the
Not
person.
always.
Yeah, not always, but that person that's been in the NBA Finals multiple times is possibly going to
Right.
be more in tune with how that situation is going to manifest and how to deal with those external factors. And I think that the first time maybe playing in that environment, you're a little nervous and you're a little, oh my gosh, I'm playing with this person, they have to be, better than you and whatever. And as you sort of build those confidence intervals we talked about earlier, you start to get around those people and you start to compete with them and you start to feel like, hey, I could compete, I could hold my own here. And working up that confidence is oftentimes the difference between what makes, like you said, there's not that many differences between the knowledge that one person knows and the other amongst the very top
level,
players.
sure.
It's a game of inches, and so a lot of times it is confidence that sets apart those two people, or it is who's more apt to take risks or apt to just go with their instincts and trust themselves in that moment, and who's just sharp at that certain time. And so I think that being around that environment is just kind of who's more in touch with that at that specific time is going to perform better.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, do you get frustrated when you have a series of bad games or bad hands, or is that inconsequential?
I would say that it's something I work on all the time to not let those emotions get to me and really try and separate my poker life from my real life,
Mm-hmm.
and so leaving those frustrations at the table and just kind of letting go of that is something I've really tried to work hard on. And so when I come home and walk in the door, it's like a completely new reality, and leaving the problems of work at work is really important. There are periods where, as a professional, you could lose for a month or two at a time, and that is a very frustrating thing to go through, especially if you feel confident that you're not being rewarded for the
Mm-hmm.
effort that you're putting in, which is often something you feel because when you're losing, a lot of times you're going to be much more apt to work harder and try and figure out what's going wrong and why am I losing, and just really trying to push and push and push, and then sometimes it still doesn't go your way, and that can be frustrating, and that's just a trade-off for the
So you
game.
just accept that as part of the routine of this occupation?
Yeah, in theory you do, but we're all human. Sometimes your emotions get the best of you. But I think that it's something that's happened less and less over time as you become more and more accustomed to just the flow of the game, and this is natural. And I sort of like to think of it like you build a tolerance for fluctuations in money and for risk taking, similarly to building a tolerance that your body builds for consumption of caffeine or alcohol, or just your body builds for exercise. You get more used to running every day when you run every day, and so when you deal with money fluctuations every day, you sort of build this threshold of pain or of tolerance that you can handle without letting it get to affect your life. And so you build this up and build this up, and then you sort of become more accustomed and more comfortable with that.
All right, Alec. We're on the topic of emotional regulation, and I want to hear a little bit more about how you do that over the course of your life. But I have another question that's really embedded in the question of how you regulate your emotions, and that deals with issues of control. It sounds like a lot of times you can have your best day and still wind up not achieving the results that are commensurate with the effort and the energy you've invested. So I would imagine that may be a challenge, because a lot of times you can be at your best, can't control the outcome.
Yeah, that is a part of it that's just accepting that role of luck in the game. I think that a lot of times the first part of your question is the emotions sort of dealing with these adversities so often at the table, like just constantly having a bad card come, or getting unlucky or something like that happens at the table, that happens so often that you sort of learn to deal with adversity very readily. And so when negativity comes into your life outside of the poker table, you're much less reactive to that. And
you're better equipped, yeah?
Yeah, I really believe that's true. And I think that things don't bother you as much because you're just so used to dealing with little shocks of pain that happen at the table when you're like, oh, this is a terrible card, and
right.
Not when a bad card comes, you're trained to think, okay, it doesn't matter what card comes. What matters is how I'm going to react to that situation.
Okay, that's
so
really
how
important.
I'm going to make my decision
Sure.
once that card is already there. You automatically, you don't have much time between when the negative action happens, let's say a bad card comes, and when you have to make a decision. Because a lot of times the card comes and it's my turn. So now I have to make a decision. So I don't really have time to lament or be frustrated that a card came, because I'm forced to make a decision for a lot of money immediately.
Right.
So when this card comes, or whether it's on the table or in life, you just sort of automatically accept the reality that happens and you make the best decision possible. And I think poker really trains you to do that, because you're just doing that all day, and that's just that's your job. And so you don't really think of things in terms of good luck or bad luck. You think you discuss hands and you talk strategy with peers and colleagues about, okay, how do I react to the situation? And we never do this thing with each other like, oh my gosh, you got so unlucky, I'm so sorry. It's just did you make the best decision?
Right.
And in life, there's so much of this, I got a ticket today, I hit 4 red lights on the way to work, and it's that's sort of like the equivalent in poker of saying, oh my gosh, this card came, I got so unlucky. And in poker, nobody wants to hear a bad beat story. And in life, it's sort of similar too. You just sort of, your effort is so much better spent just focusing on the things you can control and just making the best decisions possible. And in the end, the money will come.
Okay, so it sounds to me, if I'm interpreting you correctly, that even though financially you're vulnerable to the order of the cards, psychologically, as long as you make the right decision, you feel like you're winning.
Yes, there's a lot of comfort in that, and I think that happens more and more you're more and more in touch with that feeling and more content with that, the more you progress in your career.
Mhm.
Because the more you just satisfy yourself with, you're more and more competing with yourself, and you are accepting the reality more and more. The fact of the game that you choose to play, that the only thing you could do is just make the best decision possible.
Right.
And so you really accept that in poker, and you accept that in your life as well. And so if something bad happens, as hard as it is to accept, of course there are times when it's really hurtful. If you're playing a massive hand or a huge tournament, you're at the final table, there's 2 people left, and it's you and him, and a bad card comes. I mean, it takes a day or 2 to get over it, but you just made the best decision possible,
Right.
and what else are you going to do?
So I find it highly intriguing that you can have a terrible financial day but still feel really good about it.
Yeah, I think that, on the surface, money a lot of your success in poker is measured by money, because it's just the tool that is used
Right.
to,
It's the metric.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So, something else is measured not even by money, like a stock trade will be measured by like ROI or something. It's just
Right.
like percentage increase.
Mhm.
And even though that translates to money, it's a different metric that's used. Whereas in poker, it's usually strictly money. This guy has this many earnings or this much money won in tournaments or whatever. And so it's so big to people to think like you're only satisfied by winning money. But I think in reality, that's just the product of you doing a good work. And that's sort of a superficial way to
Okay.
measure it. And a lot of it's much more based on how well you perform.
All right. You're telling me a lot of good information, but it's time to get to the core of the issue for people interested in motivation. Why do you play, as opposed to using the skills that you've really articulated a lot of different skills in terms of planning, managing yourself, controlling yourself, reflecting on your behaviors, your experiences, building knowledge. You said you studied math. You seem that you have a good view, you get a big picture view of what you're doing, and you could have used these same skills in a lot of different professions.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that you were going to be a professional risk taker?
Ultimately, I loved it. I had a huge passion for the game the moment I started playing, and I always just loved it. I was just completely enthralled with poker, and I just wanted to spend all my time doing that. And if I had a moment of free time, there's nothing in the world I would rather be doing. And this is, when I first started playing, 10, 11 years ago, there was nothing in the world that I could imagine doing other than that. And this continued for, the first 6 or 7 years. I just would do nothing else. I would travel to all these events around the world and go to different cities, and people would be like, hey, you want to go out and see the city? I'm like, no, we just want to go to the casino play poker. Like, I just love what I do. I do this all day, every day, and that's just what I love.
But you're not playing on $1 tables or $2 tables, so...
I started there, though.
Yeah.
And I always said as a young, when I first started playing, I was like, if poker was played with, instead of chips, instead of money and chips, if we used, goldfish or chocolate or something, I'd want to be, the fattest. Because I just wanted to win all of whatever we were playing with. But of course, there's nothing like playing with money, because playing with money is really important, because it really, you can play with play money, but the problem is that people aren't forced to play their best because they don't have enough at stake.
Right.
And when the game isn't played for stakes that are high, it's not really the game at its utmost level. You're not competing at the highest level that you can be. And so, for me now, the challenge is transition. I still have a massive passion for the game. I love playing poker. I mean, I still do it very full throttle after all these years. I still love doing it. I still travel the world to compete in these games, and I absolutely love it. But you really need to be playing for a level that is challenging to you. And so now a lot of my motivation is translated also into competing and being the best. And that's really something I'm inspired by, and
that's another very interesting
pushing myself
point.
to a new limit.
You want to be the best. You also want to make money. Money's the metric. I would imagine there are situations where you can take advantage of the lack of knowledge of other people.
Yeah.
Because you're clearly superior to them, and you can probably figure that out in about 12 seconds, the level of playing ability, right?
Yeah.
So do you
oftentimes before you play a hand.
Yeah. Do you find yourself being a twofold poker player? One where you go to games where you have a decisive advantage over other people to support you financially, and then the big tournaments and the equal level of play and challenge is Are there two different ways that you go about it?
Meaning like two different motivations to which I approach
Yeah,
the game.
exactly. Because you mentioned just, you like to play with the big dogs because they are the appropriate challenge for you.
Yeah.
But I would also think when you play with the top players in the world, which of course you do, the competition is really intense. You may not come out as well financially.
Right. I think that that's a good
It's
point.
A balance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that within any given table, you're lucky to always have both. Because, a poker table has 9 players. So I'm one of those 9 players. There's 8 other people competing against me. And of course, every hand I'm competing against a different one of those 8 opponents, depending on who's in the hand with me. And a poker game, just in theory, only exists when everybody's there to make money, right? So there's 9 people thinking that they get to make money. That's pretty interesting situation, right? Because there's 9 people at a table and they all think they can win. But it's impossible. We all know it's impossible, right? Not all 9 people could win. So the situation happens when enough people think they have an advantage to sit at the table together. And so there's always going to be situations where you're competing against the elite and the best in the world, and then other people that you think you might have an advantage over. And those people all come to the same table. And they come for different reasons. Maybe if you play at the really elite games, there's people that just... Poker is one of the most interesting games in the world because, if I want to go play basketball with Kobe Bryant, I can't do that. But in poker, if you want to go play poker against whoever you deem as that person for you, all you have to do is have enough money and sit down next to them. And so at the highest levels, you're really creating these tournaments around the world and these games around the world where there's people that are extremely loving and avid lovers of the sport, of the game, that know they might not have the talent of the people that play for a living and study the game all their life, but they want to compete with them and play. And then you have all the best in the world going there. And at that table is really the marriage of that game. So I really feel like I have both motivations when I go to the table because I have both opportunities and I have both challenges. So and also it's the strategy changes a lot. Playing a hand against someone that's really gonna put you in the toughest spot ever, and this is like someone that you deem as another peer, as a colleague that's at a very elite level, is a different strategy than playing against someone that's a recreational player that loves the game that maybe just wants to take a shot at you because he wants to say he played with the best and beat them. And so they have different motivations, and you have to be aware of that as well when you're playing hands against them. So I really feel like I have both.
It's interesting that you said when you approach a table that there are 9 individuals. And I would think if you are an individual and you're committed to playing, that you're basically saying to yourself, I'm better than these 8 other people?
Yeah, or enough of them.
Is that the mentality?
I've never met anybody at poker that's not a winner. I've never met a bad driver and someone that's bad at sex. It's the same thing. Yeah. You just don't meet people that are bad at poker because no one thinks they're bad at poker.
But it seems you could be falsely calibrated, though, and I bet many people are. Well, and that's a big problem everywhere. Certainly in academics, it's a big problem. For example, a student that thinks they're well prepared for the test, or the test is going to be easy, and they have all this confidence, and they wind up sitting down and failing. So you do have to be surrounded with people that are, we'll say, over-calibrated.
There you go. Well, one of the beautiful things about our game too is that it's so much easier to be objective about ability in a game where there isn't luck, right? So you have people going to the casinos thinking they could beat the house, and the phrase "the house always wins." But you have people thinking they could win because on a certain day they go to the casino and they win. Poker is different because you're playing against other people. So as long as you're better than or worse than those other people, your result is going to manifest based on your difference in ability. Your win rate is the difference in ability between you and your opponents. So I feel like it's a lot different because you kind of need that element of luck. Whereas in chess, if we sit down and 9 people play chess or whatever, the best player is always going to win. Those people are all going to quit. There's never going to be chess. That's why there's no money in that game. In poker, it's a lot different because you have long-run losing players that are winning. In stocks, you have long-run losing players that are winning. In sports betting, you have long-run losing players that are winning. Because anyone could go to the Super Bowl and pick the winning team. And anyone could go to a poker table and sit down and win money in a given day. And so you kind of need that element of luck, and you kind of have to love and embrace that, even though in the long run, the best players are going to win. And you kind of have to be accepting of that. And that's why I think that it's easier to be accepting of that role of luck that we talked about a little bit earlier, because you know that that's what keeps you in business ultimately. That's what keeps your game alive.
Okay. So, Alec, what I really want to know, we're talking about what you do during the process of the game, maintaining your momentum, staying sharp. I've always wondered when I watch people like you on television, and I don't know exactly how much time you have to make a decision, but a lot of people are sitting there for 3, 4, 5 minutes contemplating whether or not they're going to go in. What are you thinking about during those moments? Do you even know?
Yeah, well, there's two good things there. There's three good things here. One's the first thing is, maintaining your confidence in your decisions. And I think that a lot of times when you're losing, it's really easy to second guess yourself and to have a little bit of fear be embedded in you because now you're losing and that losing sets you back, and then you think, okay, now I'm not confident enough to make this decision, and then you start to go inward. You start to become introverted in your poker playing, and you start to be like, I'm just going to be a little more passive. I'm going to wait for good spots. I'm going to be less aggressive. And you need to kind of be out there you need to be out there really pushing the action. You need to be out there making your opponents be in tough spots. Like in basketball and tennis, you need to hit winners, not play defense in tennis. You need to really go for the shots. And so in poker it's a lot the same. And so when you're losing, you kind of tend to do that, but the best players really have to be self-regulated and to always go with your confidence. But to go back,
you're doing fine. I was just wondering if you have a preconceived notion of how aggressive you're going to be on a certain day. Can you calibrate that like a 1 to 10 scale? Does it change? It's focused? How does that work?
I want to go back to the TV thing, the 3-4 minutes and the thought process. So let's not forget.
Okay.
But this thing is definitely a little bit of what we touched on earlier, being really in touch with yourself on that day and being understanding of how you're feeling. So if you had, depending on what mood you're in that day, you might be feeling much more energetic and aggressive or much more passive and relaxed. And so being in touch with how you feel like you're going to go approach the poker game is really important, because that's ultimately how you're going to succeed at the table that day. And so just being aware of the emotions you're bringing to the table, I think really help you to understand why you're being aggressive or why you're being passive or what's the best decision. But that's dealing with yourself. Strategically, of course, the most important thing to consider is always your opponents and how they are playing, how are they perceiving you as an image, what they think about you as a person, and what they think that you're ultimately going to do in a certain situation. So if I'm sitting down with a retired person that is very conservative, and they are obviously, grew up at a time where they're very conservative background and whatever.
You can tell that right away.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that by a person without meeting them. You know a lot from them, especially if you're looking for these clues. That person is going to play a hand and perceive you much differently than a person that's perhaps a trust fund kid that's punting around money. I mean, so those two people are going to have different levels of aggression.
You can spot that too, a mile away.
Yeah, of course. And so those two levels of aggression that they're going to have are different. And so that means that you need to be reacting to that, and you need to be balancing what they're doing with a counter strategy. Okay. And so that's really important. So I wouldn't say there's an optimal level of aggression or of play. When I say aggression, I mean how many hands you should play and how you should play these hands and how much money you should risk. I think that depends a lot on your opponent. Because if they're not risking any money, it means they have a really good hand. And you can't just be risking money every hand because you're not going to beat them. If they're risking money every hand, then maybe you need to play tight and only play good hands to beat them playing all the money.
So that's a day-to-day, hour-to-hour decision based upon...
No, that's a more specific. That's a hand-to-hand decision. Depending on, let's say they just lost a hand. Now that person is emotional, and maybe the next hand they're going to be chasing that money. So now they're going to be playing differently than they would have played if they just won the hand. So this strategy needs to change hand by hand. Similarly in basketball, it needs to change play by play.
Right.
If you're down, now you need to come back and you need to score. If you're up, you need to play conservative. And it's so much different, and every play in basketball changes. And every play in poker really does change based on that hand.
Okay, so it's
very, very specific.
You're making these onboard cognitive and motivational evaluations about yourself as well as your opponent. Yeah. That's what you're saying.
I mean, it could be something like they get a call from their wife, and they're obviously they're having an argument on the phone, and now they have to go. Right. So they have to leave in 30 minutes. How is that going to affect how they're going to make the decisions in the future? Right. You could use your imagination, but it depends on that person.
Oh, sure.
And who that person is and what his fears are and what his ego is, and everything goes into how he's going to play the next poker hand. And that's going to change the likely possibilities of cards he could have. which is going to change the mathematical possibilities of the cards he could have based on the cards that come, which is going to change what is the best game theory decision that I can make against that person. And that's going to change what I need to do to win against that person. And that changes every minute because everyone's human and those emotions are constantly being up and down at the table and they're constantly fluctuating depending on any number of external or internal factors. So you always have to be aware.
Okay, so is that what's going on in the person's head when they're sitting there contemplating for 3
Back
minutes?
to the question. I like that you went back to that. So this is a bit of what we discussed earlier about the TV thing and how people react on television. And this is one of those things that, like, I think that honestly, a lot, like, the first time that poker was on television, you saw these people just staring there because in poker, like, the cliche poker thing is you got to give this guy the stare down where you're like, just staring at him and trying to get a read or something, and you're trying to understand. You're waiting for him to be like, okay, I have a big hand, and like tell you something about his emotion. And this is a very amateur thing that I think maybe perhaps happened a long time ago in the past.
So it's misconception.
Yes, where people were staring at someone for 5 minutes and waiting for them to give off an emotion. They shake their head, and they shake their head to the left, and they have aces, and they shake their head to the right, and they're bluffing, and like it's a little silly, right?
Embellished,
it's
like,
okay, imagine a basketball team going into a timeout, a huddle in a timeout, and like the other team watching will be like, okay, are they going to shoot the ball or pass the ball? And it's like,
right.
I mean, they're not.
That's a great analogy.
So, it does happen to some extent. I don't want to discredit all of it because getting a read on your opponent, understanding them physically, thinking analytically about the hand is the most imperative thing you could do. But getting a read about someone's body language doesn't happen if you don't talk and I don't talk and we stay here for 5 minutes and then we stare at each other. It happens in the moment they're making their decision, in the moment they're betting, while they're thinking about betting. So when you see someone tanking, a lot of times it's like this little something that people do for TV. People don't want to look silly on television. There's a lot of external things that go on.
Right.
I think in the flow of a normal poker game, when people are tanking, it's because taking a lot of time. It's because they really do have a big decision, and this happens at the table maybe once every 30 minutes, once every hour, where someone really takes a minute or two. And I think even at the biggest games, you're playing for thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, whatever it is. People don't take more than 30 seconds to make any decision, I think. During that time, though, you are thinking. It is imperative what you're thinking. I don't want to discredit at all the strategy and the mental process that goes into thinking about all the possibilities of cards they could have, your equity, the pot odds, the math that goes in, what the best decision is, what hand they have, how much you should bet to extract the most money from their possibilities of holdings, if you should bet or let them bluff. I mean, these are very, very important things to consider, but I think that the amateur players don't consider these things, so they make decisions quickly because they bet relative to the hand they have. So they have a good hand, they bet. They don't, they check. It's easy. They make decisions quickly. And the best players have done this so much, and they also don't want to upset their customers. They don't want to make the game boring for the other people because no one wants to watch me and you staring at each other for 5 minutes on TV. They want to watch action.
Right.
So the best players are aware of this, and they make decisions very quickly. And so I think at the table you have this nice flow going. And so
it sounds to me like
that happens a lot.
When you're an expert at playing poker, that you're certainly thinking very, very differently from the novice or the occasional player.
Yes.
Thinking about different things during that period of time when you're faced with a decision and you need to show some behavior. So depending on the level of expertise, what you're thinking about is really quite wide range.
Yeah. Because it depends on ultimately the other person's level of expertise, right? Like you just need to be more in tune of what they're thinking and what their level, how they approach the game and how they make decisions, and be one step ahead of that. And so the better that person is, the more you kind of have to possibly level yourself and really think about all the possibilities. Whereas a lot of times you're playing against more amateur players where you don't really have to consider those things.
So it sounds like you're almost in the game of prediction. You're trying to figure out the person's overall profile to determine your decisions. So do you feel, I get the impression if you're sitting at the table and a decision comes, you're kind of trying to figure out exactly what that other person is thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, like, how do you tell, do you have any telltale signs that you look for and see if someone's bluffing? I mean, can you actually figure that out with some certainty?
I feel like there are
I
times.
don't want you to give away any secrets.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
No, that's
broadly.
fine. I
mean,
feel
can
like
you tell?
I feel like there are times when, without seeing their cards, I don't like to throw out a number and be like, oh, it's 150%, like something
Right.
ridiculous. With sincerity, I feel like there are times when, I mean, it's all relative too, though, how much money you risk. That's why you have a lot of money in front of you, because sometimes you risk all of your money when there's no more cards to come, because you're certain that they're going to fold, or you're certain that they don't have anything. So if they go, I feel like there's been times, to make a general statement, where you're as sure as you could be without knowing their cards.
Right.
It's like as if you
So
can
you can
see
tell.
their cards.
You can tell.
Oh
when
yeah,
somebody's bluffing.
there's not every time, but I feel like
What percentage of time do you think you can accurately assess somebody and say, yeah, I know they're bluffing, and be right?
80, 90,
Yeah,
80.
okay, that's
High.
pretty high level of confidence.
Yeah, I think like, and there's varying degrees of certainty depending on how talented your opponent is, or which cards come, or how much you know about that person. If it's the first time you and I play a hand together, it's a little harder to tell. But if we played for 4 or 5 hours, I don't want to point out you. I'm sorry, I'm not isolating you. I mean,
That's
me and a
okay.
random person that's
you,
not
you would definitely
experienced.
beat me.
I was just like just throwing you under the bus here on the camera.
Well, that's a really important point, though. You can tell. You can size somebody up in 30 minutes and know what they're thinking. That's
Yeah,
a very,
I feel like,
very good skill to have.
I feel like there are times when you're willing to bet
Right.
all your money and more money than you had on the table, and everything you have, that you're certain they're bluffing or that they're not bluffing. And a lot of times it comes down to something more simple, like just psychologically, like, is this person capable of bluffing here? Like, will they lie to me in this spot? Like, you're going into business with someone, like, is this person trustworthy? And it's just like, there's not any one thing. It's just like, yes or no. Do I want to go into business with them or not? Like, and in poker, it's like, do they have it or do they not have it? And there's times when you're just like, he just doesn't have it here, or he just has it, and I'm just gonna fold because he has it, or he doesn't have it, and I'm sure.
Okay, well, confidence is really important. You've certainly sent that message to the readers of the book. Absolutely. Okay, Alec, we've been talking a lot about how you size people up, what's going on inside your head, how you maintain momentum and motivation. Goals are something that's really important to be motivated and to keep your focus and energy. I would imagine that you probably have some career goals. Maybe you can kind of talk about that. But do you envision yourself continuing to be in this kind of lifestyle for the rest of your life?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I was, we got married a year ago, so that was a change for me, and it was really good. I'm really, really, really happy in that. I have a great wife, so that's changed a bit. But I think that my lifestyle still hasn't really changed. We're together now, and I have a team, and we're like we're a team. We have a partnership, and we travel around together, and still going around to compete in all these events, and we love it. But there might be a time when we want to have a base more in one place and not be we're traveling maybe 9 months a year, so there might be a time when you want to have a home base in one place and then maybe travel less and
Right.
whatever. As far as poker goes, I always love playing. I'm always gonna love playing, and I'm just not sure if it's always gonna be with this high of an intensity. I'm not sure if I'm gonna always want to travel around to compete, because to really compete at the highest levels, you kind of have to be where the game. You have to be on the circuit. It's kind of like tennis or golf, and so I'm just not sure how long that part of it's gonna last. But I think always wanting to compete in the industry is something I'm always gonna want to do.
So when you're thinking about maybe 20 years from now, if you're not playing poker, what are you doing?
I don't know, and I have a lot of interests. I have like a ton of pastimes and passions that I really like to explore and things. And for me, it's ultimately more about creating an ideal lifestyle that allows me to free up my time to pursue the things that I want and to have the lifestyle that I want and structure my days and my life in the way I want. And so it's less about actually like what specific activity I'm going to be doing, and it's more about looking at money and my hobbies in two different ways. So a lot of people associate work with their passion and their money, and it all has to come from one place. And for me, it's more about finding a source of being making sure I'm financially secure, and then spending my time doing things that I enjoy doing.
Right.
And so what actually I'm doing for work is not, this is sort of one part of the overall pie for me.
Well, I know you mentioned when we were speaking earlier that you actually coach other people how to play. Could that be maybe setting up a poker school?
Yeah, and that's something I'm actually working on. I'm doing
Poker University.
Yeah. Also talking about elements of being a successful poker player that transverse into being successful in other businesses. For example, confidence and motivation and overcoming adversity and making good choices, and all those things are transferable into other industries. And so I involve a lot of that being mentally sharp and thinking clearly. All those things translate well, and so I involve that a lot in my coaching. And so the coaching goes well beyond just how to play a hand of poker. It's a lot of lifestyle things, and so that's something I really enjoy. I really like to focus on in the future. That's something I would really like to pursue.
Well, I just have one more question for you about that. It seems to be a world class player. You have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of experience, you have excellent psychological management and self-regulation. Wouldn't it be to your disadvantage to teach those skills to other people that may come back and, beat you in the long run? Why do you even take the time to coach other players?
That's a good question. I think that, I don't know, I think the niche that I'm competing in is very, it could come back to bite you for sure. But, it's something I really enjoy, and I think that's basically the reason I do it, if I have to think about it. It's not something I ever really weighed, like in terms of a strategic decision for my career. I think it's mostly just I love doing it. I love sharing with others things I've learned. I love motivating others to be better and accomplish their dreams and do things that they've wanted in their life, and I really like that. And so I really get a lot of fulfillment out of that with my coaching, and I like to see others improve, and I like to be a part of that experience for them. And just, there's so many things I wish that I could have perspective on when I was starting my career, and so to be in a position to possibly offer that to someone else is really inspiring to me, and it's really just humbling to be able to do that and be in that position. And so I really just enjoy it, and maybe it'll make the game more challenging for me, but it's also more exciting.
You've never been beaten by one of your students, have you?
Unfortunately, we haven't.
Happens to me all the time.
Haven't played together much yet, so. But it could happen, and definitely, if it happened, at least it means I'm a good coach.
All right. Well, whatever makes you feel good. Anything else you want to tell me before we turn the camera off?
Not that I can think of. This is great. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.